All right, so we're very excited to have Professor Caterina Calsamiglia join us for the March Colloquium for MD4SG. I'm going to give a short introduction and then I'm going to switch to Caterina continuing the talk. So Caterina Calsamiglia is an ICREA research professor at the Institute for Political Economy and Governance in Barcelona. She got her PhD from Department of Economics at Yale University, and her research focuses on market design and public policy design with a particular interest in education, and her work includes theoretical, experimental, and empirical analysis. In the recent years, she's been leading a research initiative to help develop Pantabilities in lifelong learning processes. And to assist with this, she co-founded the Pantabilities app, a tool to track and to analyze the development of your Pantabilities. Today, Caterina will talk about the design of university entrance exams and its implications for gender gaps. So thank you, Caterina, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you very much. It's extremely nice to have the opportunity to present my work in this very nice community that you guys have created. So this is joint work with Andreu Arenas, who's also in Barcelona. He's at a different university, but also in Barcelona. And it's on gender differences that arise when you have high stakes exams. And in particular, college admissions is going to be the main application. Hold on. Okay, so college admissions is a very important process that happens worldwide. In many countries, we have centralized procedures where public universities mostly there's a centralized procedure that determines who gets to study where. In some countries, the capacity is unlimited, so anybody can study whatever they want, but in most places, capacity is fixed, and then you have to design a system of how you're gonna collect preferences and then of individuals, and then how you're gonna allow them to, where you're gonna allow them to study. Okay, and then usually in these two-sided matching markets, well, this is basically one-sided in the sense that universities are not given the capacity to choose. It's just that there's a centralized norm that defines how you rank students and who gets to choose first. And usually the mechanism is some sort of Gale-Shapley deferred acceptance, but where the priorities are determined solely by the grades that the students get. Okay, and this grade is usually a combination of the GPA in high school and a high stakes exam. Okay, so and this is the case in many countries worldwide. So like China and Korea, Spain, Brazil, there's very many countries where this is like that. The US and the UK are not, but it's still the case that there's this high stakes exams that definitely play a very huge role in defining a college admissions, although in the US now this is actually fading out, and it seems like institutions are learning that maybe they should not. But basically in this high stakes exam are still very relevant worldwide. Okay, hold on, I'm having, yeah, okay. And then on the other hand, so this grades are just seemed like a meritocratic way of ranking people that all want to study in the same place. No, so you have 100 seats, you have 200 applicants. How are you going to decide who gets to study what they want? Well, grades seem like a very decent, way of doing it. For a school choice, it's very often random, but at a college level, maybe you can already use the information you have about students to determine who gets where, no? But then doing it through this high stakes exam may have consequences. So in particular, we know that the reaction to very high stakes situations is very different for different social groups. Okay, in particular, we know that females do worse in competitive environments. So they generally fade away from those competitive environments, and whenever they're forced into them, they actually perform worse. Okay, so there's different literatures discussing this fact, but they're mostly lab experiments, seeing how gender differences arise in competitive environments. the Asmat and co-authors, one of them being myself, we actually follow a cohort of, we follow different 10 years of a school, and we see that girls, so whenever the girls generally perform better than boys, but then that this difference shrinks as the stakes increase. Okay, and that when the stakes are super high, which is in this high stakes exam for college admissions, the gap actually disappears completely. But this study here only looks at one particular school. So, but this is like the one source of field data that sort of explains this kind of systematic differences due only to stakes. Okay, so the size of the stakes, not necessarily the change in the competitiveness, because in this framework that they look at there, the competitiveness per se is kept constant, and it's only like the weight of the specific exam that increases or decreases that affects the behavior of females. Okay. So if we know that there's this difference, well, you wonder that maybe breaking ties in this way is maybe not very effective, okay? And but we have very little, we have limited idea of what the actual impact of this kind of policy is on actual college admissions, like to what extent this is really something that affects who gets where and so on. Okay, so we're not going to be able to do full-fledged, like what's the whole impact of doing like having the high stakes exams be relevant, but we're going to do is compare two different policies that change the weight that that the high stakes exam has. So there's going to be, I told you in most countries, it's a combination of the GPA plus the high stakes exam. Here, we're basically going to look at the impact of changing the weight, and in particular of increasing the weight that the high stakes exam has. Okay. So we're going to study that source of variation, what happens when that changes, and we're going to look at how that affects the score that is used to break ties, like how does that change with the change in weights, and how that impacts the access to college and career prospects of the affected individuals. Okay, and then we're going to try and see whether the people that are basically excluded from going to the college that they want to, are they people that would have performed better or worse than the ones that did get accepted. Okay, so that's the kind of analysis we're going to be doing here. Questions? Comments? Something? No, you're all fine? Very good. So it's going to be very data driven. I mean, it's all the empirical stuff, as you see, a little theory today. And we're going to be using bits and pieces of different data sets to sort of construct the full story. Okay, so we're going to have, so the policy change was in 2010, and we do have college applications from 2006 to 2012. So we have a little bit before and a little bit after, which allows us to see how these grades change. We're going to have like the data from this one school that I told you we did this study for, that we're going to use for one particular analysis. And then we basically collected survey data on wages. Okay, so for 1,000 people, and then we also have data on college performance for 2 large universities in Catalonia. Okay, but we only have the data for pre-treatment cohorts. So we have all these bits and pieces. This is not Norway yet, or northern countries. We are not there yet, but slowly, we're putting in the pieces, and hopefully one day we'll just have everything we want. Yeah. Okay, so preview, we're gonna find a big impact. Okay, we're gonna find that the number of females that the entrance grades are heavily affected, basically on average decreasing by 2% the rank in which they're located. which is similar to the impact of being born in December versus January. I don't know if you know, if you're aware of this literature that looks at the age effect, month of birth, how that affects, when you get into school, and how that affects your performance in the future. And we are going to find that the effect is largest for the top performers. Okay. So it's not the case that this impacts the lower part of the distribution, but quite the contrary, it affects people wanting to access the top places. And then we're going to see that it's basically, yeah, so we're going to see, yeah, I'm not sure whether this is going to make sense to you now, but there's going to be, so there's a mechanical effect just because we know that females do worse in this high stakes exam. Giving higher weight to that exam is going to be mechanically lowering the grade, right? The result of that average, okay? But there's also this additional effect, which is, does the fact that this now has a higher weight induce an even worse performance for females? And do they anticipate that and then prepare better for those particular subjects? So there's these two different things. We're going to try and talk about this a little bit by looking at this one school data, because for them we have a very complete picture. But overall, we're going to see that these two behavioral effects, like whether the higher stakes make me do a worse job, but then me anticipating that makes me study even harder, these two things cancel out. And so we're going to see that the net size of the effect is going to seem quite mechanical, in the sense that it doesn't seem like the behavioral effects have a net, induce a net effect on the grades, okay? But it's basically just the fact of mechanically giving higher weight to this exam, for which we know that females do worse in general, yeah? And then we're going to see that that also induces that females have reduced access to the most selective programs, okay? And then that is going to have a consequence on their expected wage. Okay? So now you can go, because you know everything. All right, and then...
Can I ask a quick clarifying question about when you're reweighting the grades here for the exam? How much of that is like public information? Do people know it in a way that they can like react to it and think about it, or is it unknown to people?
I'll tell you right now. Let me just go directly. So the previous slide is just previous literature. It's there. You can take a look at it, or maybe I should stop a little bit to make sure that people can see it if they want to. Basically, this was so the rationale for the policy change was the grade that was used for each of the colleges was exactly the same, and was just the weighted average of these two averages, okay? And then there was a whole debate of, why use exactly the same average for all colleges? If you want to do economics, maybe it makes more sense that you weight math a little bit more than literature. Or if you want to do literature, maybe you want to weight more the languages than you do math, and so on and so forth. So what they did was a weird kind of thing, but they said, take the grade. So the grades were from 0 to 10 before. Okay, and they said, take the grade as it was before, like from this weighted average, and from 0 to 10, we'll basically have exactly the same grade as before. But now we're gonna have from 10 to 14, there's 2 points for two additional subjects that are particular to the subject that you want to study. Okay, because in Spain, you have to, by the way, you have to pick your major from the onset. Like you really have to specialize very early on, which basically means you pick your major, and depending on your choice, the 2 subjects that are going to be counting for college admissions are going to be different, okay? And it's going to be 2 points for each of the subjects that you pick at max. So if you have a 10 in math and a 10 in physics, you will get like 14 points up to 14 points to access, say, physics. Okay, so the summary is here. So this is what it was before. It was just the weighted average of this high stakes exam and the high school GPA. And then after the policy change, it's this mess that you don't necessarily, I mean, the first part is just the same as here. And then here, it's just the two subjects that are used for the particular fields of study that you want to choose. But bottom line, what ends up happening is that these two subjects have so much more weight than the other subjects. And it's not that the subject per se has a higher weight, but it's the exam of those the high stakes exam of those two particular subjects. So it's not that they took the GPA in school and also weighted it differently, like saying math also in school counts more, but it was only the high stakes exams, which basically means that overall the result is that you have that high stakes exams count a lot more than they did before. Okay. Very good. And basically, what, as I said, we have a sample for 2006 to 2012. And we have the entrance grade, meaning this weighted average already, the program that they're applying for, and then some covariates such as paternal and maternal education, postal code, and high school that they attended. Okay. So results. Okay, it's going to be a very graphical presentation, which I think is nice. There's all kinds of stars attached to it if you're interested, but I think it's really nice that you can visually see this as well. So these are the average, so these are the entrance grades, right, that are used to determine who gets to choose first for a given, if there's over demand, right? And this is before the policy change for females, and this is before the policy change for males. So you see that it remains more or less, these are all, by the way, normalized. So the comparison is okay, it's really comparing males versus females. And then we see that this difference remains constant over time, okay, but this difference is shrinked after the policy change, okay, which does tell you that suddenly the entrance grades for this, for females in general, is reduced, and the entrance grade or admissions grade is increased for males. Okay, if you want to control for more things and put this as part of a regression, you can do this, and this is like the coefficient on being female that arises. Okay, but this is basically the same as this, providing the same kind of information that was provided earlier on. Okay, and then question is this mechanical? Just you told me females do worse in this type of exam, I'm giving higher weight. So of course, you know, females are going to be doing worse if I give more weight to those things. Or is it the case that because the stakes are higher, now females do even worse? And is it the case that they know they will be doing worse and then prepare even more for those particular two exams, thereby also improving their performance? So it could be, you know, there could be worse because of higher stakes, but better because they anticipated and actually and prepare more. So the way we're going to try and get at this is, if they prepared more, okay, we should see that their grades in school are improved for those particular subjects, right? By the way, I should tell you something else, which is the particular subjects that are very important to you are not necessarily going to be important to your peers, because they may not be applying for the same major. So in a classroom, there's going to be people for whom the stakes are very high and people for whom the stakes are going to be low, right? And the teachers don't even know that either, right? Because they don't know necessarily what you're going to be studying or not. And so they're just going to teach basically the same, or everybody's just going to suddenly, I mean, the incentives are exactly the same for all teachers, in the sense that they're going to have some for whom the stakes are going to be higher, and some for whom they will not be higher. Yes. So in terms of the teaching, it should be homogeneous across fields and so on. So the question that we're going to want to see is it the case that the score in school that I'm going to obtain, if that's the subject I'm going to choose to be doing for the high stakes, is the score there higher, which would show that I'm preparing more for it, right? So basically, wait. Yeah, I'm not going to be showing you what I told you I would be showing you. I'm sorry. That would be such a good analysis. Why did I not put this in here? Anyway, so I'm just going to be showing you whether the difference between the exams that count more versus less over time. So we have, say, math and physics versus everything else. Over time, if there was no change in my reaction to it, just because of the change in the stakes, right? There shouldn't be a significant difference in this, right? The difference should not be significant. Yes. But if the stakes per se do matter, then I should see a difference. Yes. Okay. Let me just. Okay. So this is the result. So we do see that females do slightly, so this is the difference between field courses, so we do see that these are the specialized, right? These are the two high stakes grades, the first two. So if the difference is negative, that means that they actually do worse. Okay, so they do worse. Okay, this is just this very particular school for which we have all these different grades over time. For the other data, we just have the admission score together. So we cannot disentangle what part is due to the high stakes and what part is due to the GPA. Okay. All right. So here, let me show you this first. I think this is better. This is trying to show that overall, the effect is basically mechanical. So these two behavioral things, I've shown you evidence for one, which is that they do worse for the high stakes exam when it's higher. So the exams that are going to count more, they do significantly worse when they do count more. Okay, before the policy change, they don't do significantly worse. So it's not the case that females do generally worse in whatever subjects they will be caring about more. Okay, but here we just simulate only for the cohorts that we have information. We basically simulate what the mechanical effect would be of reweighting things, and we see that the difference would not be there. Okay, so overall, it seems like the behavioral things compensate each other, so that it seems like if you just look at the net effect of everything, it seems to be just the mechanical effect being there, which is the red plus the orange here. Okay, and the blue and the green. Now the previous slide was, it's a bit of a mess, but this is high school GPA for females and high school GPA for males, and then high stakes exams for females and males. So you can see how the gap, the gap of the GPA is very large and the gap for the high stakes exam is very small. So the only reason why you do have a gap in the admission score is basically because you do have that the GPA counts. Yes? Okay, so now who does it affect most? Is it an effect that is it impacting everybody in the same way or not? Okay. So in order to do that, we want to sort of anticipate who's going to be in the upper end of the distribution and who's going to be at the lower end of the distribution using your observables, okay? Because we don't want to look at the endogenous variable per se. Okay, so what we do is first estimate who are going to be the people that are at the top at the bottom. Okay, So we're estimating the test score that you will have and compute predicted test scores based on your observables at the beginning. Okay. And then we're going to split the sample. We're going to split the analysis depending on whether your X's predict that you're going to be doing very well or not so well. Okay. And basically here, as you see, the X's are the parent's education, year and month of birth, high school, and nationality, and your postal code. Yeah, please ask questions, huh? I don't want you to stay stuck thinking about something and not asking about it. Okay, so from here we see that those people that are predicted to be the top performers, for those the gap reduction seems to be larger. Okay, in particular for this group here, the gap seems to be pretty constant. Okay, and for these two, it seems to be larger. So that means it's for the top performers that the impact is higher. It's also important to know that it does not affect college enrollment. Okay, so it affects where you enroll. It also makes sense that it's, you know, it's coherent with them being the top performers in the sense that it doesn't allow you to go to your top preferred choice, but it still allows you to go somewhere. And so the lower end of the distribution, which are the people that potentially would drop out, and drop out, not that they would not decide not to go to college, those are not affected. So we don't see an impact on enrollment. Okay. Questions? No? Okay. So it does not affect enrollment, and what we're going to see is basically that it affects the selectivity of the program that you get into. Hannah, I think Hannah is having an automated on and off micro. Okay, so we're gonna see that it affects the selectivity, and we're gonna see that it mostly affects not the field of choice, but basically within a given field, the selectivity of the program. Okay. And then how do you measure selectivity? Well, if you think about it, if the mechanism used is deferred acceptance with the grades being the priority, the less person being accepted into the program defines a threshold grade. The higher that threshold grade is, the more selective the program is. Okay, so we're going to try and compare the threshold grade for that females get accepted to before and after. Okay, and then we're going to look at career prospects, meaning what does that imply in terms of wages. Okay, so what we see here is what are the colleges that they get what are the programs that they get accepted to? What's the threshold grade for those programs? Okay, and we do see that basically females get accepted into programs that do worse, that have a lower threshold grade, and males higher. Think that it didn't necessarily have to be the case, no? If you're just applying for something that you actually have much higher grade than the threshold, those differences in performance should not have an impact on where you get into. Okay, so this really means that it has an impact on where you get into, because these people are not getting accepted into where they were getting before, and the opposite is true for males. Yes?
Oh, sorry, can I ask another clarification question on this one? So the graph for females is the green one, in which we see that their threshold decreases. So fewer of them are accepted than where they were accepted before 2010, basically, right?
Oh, yeah, you're right. Did I not show you? Yes, you're right. I'm not showing you the right. So fraction of female students by pre-reform threshold grade. I'm not describing what I'm showing. Well, you're right. You're doing a much better job than I am. Sorry. So you're right. Continue the question. But
Right.
the first part was very important to set the context because it's not what I was telling was there. Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, yeah. So maybe would you mind saying again then what is the, so in here is the fraction of female students who are in, so the top one for green is who have like a threshold grade higher than median. So is that for like
More
more
selective programs.
right? Okay. So the more selective ones are getting worse, but the least selective ones are getting more females in.
Exactly.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is, so I don't know where I have this other graph with them, but you know, looking at the programs that they get accepted to, but it would be equivalent basically. So yeah, so this is showing, which, I mean, this is a new piece of information, which is more selective programs have a higher fraction of females, which is something that I hadn't shown you before. Okay, and that higher representation of females goes down. Okay, so in some sense, there's more mixing. Okay, because here there was more than 60% of females, and now this is reduced. And in degrees where the fraction of females was lower, you know, now it's increased. So not necessarily, it's too bad that it's correlated with selectivity, but in terms of just mixing, it seems to be okay. Now, in terms of career prospects, what we did here is we basically collected survey data. We called people that were 4 years out of the college, and it's only for people who were in the pre-treatment era. Okay, because the post-treatment era, they are not. They basically have had very little exposure to the labor market. Okay, so we just selected people from the pre-treatment era and looked at basically their labor market outcomes after 4 years. Okay, so here are two things. You would have thought that the selectivity of the program would predict wages. Okay, so that the threshold grade, meaning the grade that is required for you to enter, should be correlated with wages, and it's not. Okay, but within the field, it is. Okay, so being in a more or less selective program within a given field does have impacts on your wages. Okay, and remember that I told you that basically the largest impact is not so much across fields, but within majors. Okay. Okay, so here's a graph that has very little to do with the analysis that I'm showing, but that I found so fascinating that I have to put it here. So this is the wage, and this is the fraction of females that are there in that field. So there's super strong correlation between the fraction of females that work in the field and the wage. So that's just the line. And then within that, there's still a wage gap. But I think both dimensions are sort of, I mean, this correlation is so damn, there. It's bad. Like just, yeah. Okay, so here it's a little bit saying a similar thing than we were saying before. The fraction of females that enroll in a program. So here's the, hold on, fraction of females in the program. Okay. Hold on, what am I saying? Fraction of females enrollment by pre-treatment females enrollment. Yes, exactly. So I look at the fields that had high fraction of females, and I again find that this does a little bit of mixing. Okay, so there's less women in the fields that were populated by females. Now there's less females there. Okay, so these are the pre-reform fraction of female was higher than median. Okay, so where there were more women, now there's less. And where there were more men, now there's actually a little bit more females. So again, this is pointing out at the same thing as before, which is that there seems to be a little bit more of mixing, but it's too bad that it's all within field. So this was, yeah. Okay, so what we find here is basically that the impact on wage is negative. Okay, so if you run a regression on the earnings explained by the field and all these different things, you do find that that females earn less after the policy change. Okay, and the way we do this is by looking at the X's that we know about the females. So remember that the estimation we did with the pre-treatment kids, because we don't have wage data for them. Okay, so we basically look at whether the X's plus females, like whether the predicted wage is going to go down. Okay, so this is really predicted stuff, but predicted is going to go down for these females, looking at the degrees where they obtained, and so on and so forth, given the X's that we know at this point about these females. Okay. Okay, so I mean, a very important thing here is this difference in performance. Is it capturing something interesting? Is it, the fact that they do worse under high stakes, is it something that is predictive of other things? Is this correlated with, how well you manage frustration, how willing you're to take risks that may be useful for all these other things? I mean, is this difference between, or is it just, a bias that teachers have for females because they're so well behaved and so easy to handle in the classroom that they just get this extra kick in the GPA? And so actually the difference between the high stakes and the low stakes is just the fact that there's a bias in grading policies for teachers. So the question is, are we missing something important? Is this difference really implying that we're selecting a different set of people? And in particular, are these different set of people more or less able to do college? Okay. It would be ideal actually to do this with respect to wages already, right? Because at the end of the day, you want to see whether you're giving opportunities to people that then will be able to perform better in the labor market. But we cannot do that because we don't have enough data. So we're just going to look at whether the people that we see, are they people that they're going to be doing better or worse in college? Okay. So what we're going to do is the following. So we're going to basically look at the post data. Okay. And we're going to construct a predictive model of, given your X's, what I know about you, what is the predicted admissions grade that you're going to get. Okay, so we train a model using post data, and we train a model using pre data. We do it with Lasso because it sounds sexy, but you do an OLS and it's so linear that you do equally well. So no need to, wonder. It's all pretty linear in this test scores world. Okay, so but at the end, we're looking at given your X's, this is going to tell me, are you likely to be benefited by the change in the policy or not? Meaning, are you more likely to be, so if beta is positive, that means you're more likely to get into college now than you were before. So you're benefited. You're more likely to be in college in the one that you wanted before. Okay, so what we're going to do is calculate this beta for everybody and see how that beta correlates with college performance. Okay. And in particular, we're going to look at whether the unexplained part of college performance is correlated with that. Okay. Unexplained meaning the admissions grade and the program and the year. So only the variation within, before you enter. No, am I selecting a better or worse set of people? Okay. And these are the results. So we do see here that females' predicted performance is generally better than males, okay, independently of the beta, which is in a little bit in line with the fact that females in general do better in education, okay. And here's what we see in terms of females that are harmed by the policy. They're worse performers than females that are benefited by the policy, okay, which is good news. Okay, we're selecting a better set of females. And the same is true for males. If you compare those who are harmed by the policy and those who are benefited by the policy, this is doing a better job. What happens is that the females that we're kicking out are better than the males that we're accepting in. Okay, so that's a bit of a problem. But overall, if you just look at the impact, remember the objective of the policy was to target, make sure that the people were good at what they were going to be required to be good at in college. So overall, this is doing a good job, okay? It's just that across gender, it's mixing things up, okay? And it's not, so controlling for gender, everything is fine. But the fact that the weights change how females and males, the composition of one or the other, basically also creates this negative effect there. Okay, so it's not the case that that the females that you're, that this is one thing that I was thinking when we started the analysis is that females tend to just do better at everything, and that they're not so comfortable with, like, this I like and this I don't like so much, and so I'm going to work a lot on this and I'm not going to work. I mean, it seems like we're more compliant with everything. So the variance in grades is actually smaller for females than for males. So I thought selecting based on just a few subjects may actually harm females because the average is just generally higher. Controlling for a grade in math and physics, let's say, the average is going to be higher for females, but that's not what's driving. I mean, this is true, but it's not driving the main results. Okay, so this is it. So basically, high stakes exams do make a difference on who gets accepted into where, and it particularly harms females, and it doesn't particularly, capture something that is useful in terms of predicting how well you're going to be doing afterwards in college. What remains, and I think is very important, is why females are doing so much better throughout education, and then they go into the labor market, and we saw very clearly that they do worse in every field, and in fields where there's more women, they do even worse. So either education is not preparing for what is useful in the labor market, which would be my first bet, or there's something else there. And I think this is it.
Thank you so much, Caterina. That was really interesting. I have quite a few questions, but I want to open up for questions for everyone. If anyone has a question, please feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand. If you prefer using the chat, put it in the chat and we'll ask the question as well.
I have actually one question. Hi.
Hey, Ruben.
So based on this research that you did and the expertise you gained, what do you think is a good policy or a good weight between like high school GPA or high stakes exam, or do you think they should be abolished altogether?
So very good question. I do think that having some, I mean, if you said, shall we do everything GPA? It would be crazy, because we do know that there's very different grading policies, like different schools do very differently, and then the responsibility of the teacher would be enormous, no? And so you would find that there would be just too much grade inflation. But so the role of this centralized exams for disciplining a bit makes a lot of sense, but it's not it's not clear how it should discipline this. So one thing could be, I'm just going to have the GPA count, but if your school deviates more than I don't know what from the standardized exam, not for females or for males, just on average, then I'm basically going to penalize you systematically, no? And I think this is something that in Israel is done. It's used to discipline a little bit the GPA part. So I think that would make a lot of sense to use these exams to sort of discipline teacher behavior, but not so much to make it count directly, because it's also true that, like I've emphasized very much gender, but the same is true for socioeconomics. Like low socioeconomics also do worse in this high stakes exam. And there's this whole debate about in the UK, they used predictive grades to substitute A-level exams this year because of COVID. And people were all like, oh, the predicted grade is much lower for people coming from poor backgrounds. And they thought this was a problem of the prediction, but it's not a problem of the prediction. It's a problem of the training data. The training data is created in an environment where low socioeconomics do worse in high stakes exams. So the prediction is going to replicate that. But people had not noticed that until this exercise was done. So I think this makes us think about what the role of this one-day exam should be. There's also a very important element here, which is we also did the exercise of trying to predict this high performance exams, high stakes exams for this year, also for COVID, trying to see whether it would make sense, instead of running the exam, having a prediction be used instead. And what we found is that half of the variation that you see in the data, you cannot explain using GPA, which is also like, we had GPA, schools, socioeconomics, we had all kinds of information, and you could not predict the grade. So that means there's a lot of noise. So we're selecting people into college based on a lot of noise. So that's also, and then that noise is systematically correlated with some subgroups that are disadvantaged already in general. So, not clear that that makes a lot of sense. Okay, but I do think that it's important not to just abolish things, because if you don't have a procedure, then how do you just, unless you say, well, unlimited capacity, everybody go wherever they want, like they do in Germany, which is sort of nice, I think. But if not, you like just letting it be that colleges decide based on who knows what is also complicated, no? So I think it's a very delicate kind of thing. I also think that these exams have a huge impact on what happens in schools. Like people prepare for this exam. So if we could change what those exams do, you would not be preparing so much for this one time whatever, but maybe you can prepare for things that are more relevant for the labor market, so that basically we can train people for what is going to not only train, but also select people based on whatever they're going to be needing afterwards. No, so if you have to be a teacher, it's very important that you can be empathic and that you can be, adaptive, that you can work well in teams, or that you can do whatever. No, but if you want to be, so I was talking to this vocational training schools, and they're like, no, this 21st century skills, we don't want them for all our degrees. They said, we have firefighters that are doing this entrepreneur things, and then they like emphasize this creativity and all this initiative and whatever. We don't want initiative or creativity for firefighters, Those you want to do exactly what you want them to do. And so for some professions, you need some skills, and for some professions, you need some others. And I think it would be very nice if we could think very carefully about what is needed for all these different things, and do a better match than just this one-day exam that is not predictive. It cannot be predicted looking at your past, and is not predictive of future performance. I think it clearly points out that we should think about other ways of capturing the skills, no?
May I ask a question?
Of course.
Thank you for the talk. It was very interesting. I read some of your works, and I saw that you're doing some work on pentabilities as well. And I'm curious if you think trainings on like specific non-cognitive skills could alleviate this gap in the performance of high stakes exam. For example, providing training for students to deal with stress under high stakes situations. Do you think that could be a possible intervention?
If you ask me, I think this, because this reaction to this high stakes situation is not predictive of future performance, I would think it's not very worth it to prepare people for that particular thing. I do think that working on what will be relevant, I mean, maybe doing very well in this very specific exam and this very particular task is not very important, but maybe there's other traits like resilience or like tenacity or creativity that are really, 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 really not captured through these exams. That is maybe worth starting to work on and to somehow evaluate so that we can prepare people for what will be relevant in the future. You know, like instead of having standardized exams on, I think one of the very nice things about standardized exams is that they're standard, like everybody gets the same thing. The answers, they're not open questions, because open questions cannot be standardized in terms of grading. So it has to be super, you know, really having a standardized exam means it's a very absurd kind of question at the end. No, because you cannot, things have to be so precise in terms of what the right answer is exactly and so on, that basically you end up asking people to replicate things. And this Google does really well for you. So it's really, really not useful to prepare people to do that. You know, so, but then how are we going to evaluate all this? How are we going to standardize all of this? No, this is the kind of challenge we have. And I'm starting to think that one way of standardizing or making something objective is aggregating a lot of subjective. So if you have a lot of people over time being exposed to situations where they have to show their creativity in front of different people and in front of different situations, and if all these behaviors can be tracked and observed, maybe the aggregation of all this data can slowly start telling you what this person looks like, no? Wanting to do this with one observation, I mean, what kind of statistic can you get at with one observation? Right? So it doesn't make any sense that we're aiming to measure something that is so complex as your abilities with this one observation, right? And that has to be so objectively whatever, and it's just not going to work. So we are very comfortable because it's very standardized and everything is very transparent, but it's so transparent that it's actually very, very absurd as well. So at this point, I don't know whether randomizing who gets in and who doesn't, you know, could be better than using this high stakes exam. It would be an interesting thing to do.
I had a follow-up question, hi Caterina,
Hey.
on your suggested interventions, because it seems like there's a couple of things you're trying to address, right? You're trying to address the high stakes environment. You're trying to address the fact that the standardized test tests certain abilities. And I was wondering if you had thoughts on addressing them separately. So let me give an example. In Sydney, Australia, which is where I'm from, we also have a similar system where they combine the GPA and it results from one sort of standardized test at the end of your schooling. But they combine it in this very interesting way where your GPA also determines your rank at your school. And then your exam score is the average of your own score and the score of the person at your rank. So let's say you were first at your school, but you're really bad at exams under stress and you don't do that well on the exam day. There are less stakes because you know that your school will still be pulled up by the rest of your cohort.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this to me seems like an intervention that's specifically trying to aim at the one observation, high stakes part of the problem, but not necessarily, measuring a different kind of ability or aptitude part of the problem.
Right. No, so to me, I mean, it's the thing was there's this difference between what GPA and high stakes exam measures, no? And then we see that basically that is really not predictive of anything, so that it's not like that it's worth using that as a measure of something useful. Okay, so in that sense, that was the only thing that I was trying to say there. But then it's also true that while I'm at it, I use the opportunity to just say that I think overall this doesn't make, I mean, this is more related to like there's this gap in college and there's this gap in the labor market that is just suggesting, I mean, I'm not happy saying this is all discrimination, that in the labor market suddenly there's all this discrimination for females. But to me it's more like there's something, we're valuing things that are very different in the education environment than in the labor market, and we should make sure that that maps better. And what we're missing is not what this difference in high stakes and low stakes is capturing, which is this competitiveness, but it's something else. And then, I don't remember your name, but you asked about pentabilities, and pentabilities is about all these other abilities, and then I just went for it. But you're right. I mean, there's nothing there suggesting that the abilities are not the right ones, other than saying, look, there's a gap in the education that doesn't correspond to the labor market. So it's not clear that what we're doing in education is so good for females anyways. So because the college performance is also much better for females. So it's just.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting discussion.
I have a question. Hi, Caterina. Thank you so much for the talk. I really liked it and enjoyed it. So I have a question about what you mentioned just now, that you looked at a lot of covariates like socioeconomic status and some of the other things you mentioned. Like, do you see this kind of striking difference between genders also along other lines, like socioeconomic status or other things, or is it only so striking for gender?
I mean, it's more like socioeconomics doesn't play such a big role. I mean, within socioeconomics, there's still like the gap is there, but it's more like the higher end of the distribution in terms of talent and the lower that is a bigger. So if you're a top performer female, you're going to be doing much worse. Like the gap is is larger the higher you are in the ability distribution. You know what I mean? Like controlling for socioeconomics, you look at the ability distribution, the top performers are the ones who are more affected by this change, which in some sense also says for those the stakes are higher. Because so the way, this is something that I should probably tell you about, it's basically there's this very highly competitive degrees, and then the rest are just for everybody else, and so competitiveness is there much lower. So in some sense, the stakes for the lower end of the distribution are also smaller because the kind of things that they have access to is already reduced. So I cannot really disentangle how much is just the upper tail being affected by it, or just really the stakes being much more relevant for this upper tail. So unfortunately, I think what I can tell you is the gaps are smaller for the lower end. Controlling for socioeconomics are generally smaller for the lower end, but I cannot tell you whether it's these people are just not affected or just these people are not affected because the stakes are really not high for them.
Yeah, thank you. That's super interesting, I guess, because there's sort of this latent variable is like how high the perceived stakes are, and that you're not really able to measure. I guess I was wondering if you also find the same kind of effect when you look at people in different socioeconomic status groups. Like, would they also be, I guess, kind of harmed by the reform because of the same defects that I guess females tend to.
That's something that we're doing now, and it's not as nice to graphically show the results. So for females, it's super clean. For socioeconomics, we don't have, like, we have parents' education, and if you draw the graphs, it's not as beautiful. If you run the regressions, you do get significance. So the results are there, but they're just not as nice to present, and we're still figuring out exactly how to present them. But the results are there, in the sense that they also harm this particular subgroup. But we have not been able to do like the college and all this other analysis that I've told you about. Also, I mean, when we designed the survey, so this is something that started like a couple years ago. And so then there was no COVID, no nothing. So the whole debate about the predictions used in some countries are harming the low socioeconomics and so on was not part of the debate back then. So when we designed the survey, it was all designed just to see gender. We never thought that socioeconomics could also be an issue until, you know, we did this predictive exercise due to COVID, and then we saw that the prediction was particularly bad for low socioeconomics. So we're like, oh, maybe this high and low stakes difference is also true for high and low socioeconomics. And we can do that with the administrative data, but the survey data is not so well designed to really identify the effect for them at this point. So we're going to have to collect more data.
I see. Yeah, thank you.
So when we targeted our population for the survey, we did not do things correctly so that we could identify the effect of being in different socioeconomics. But that's something I think we should do in the future.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, I have a last question, Caterina, related to, there was a really interesting graph looking at how like the threshold grade is like goes lower for the women who initially had like higher than median threshold grade exams, but then it goes higher for women who had lower than median. So like, I think that's interesting. How does that compare to like, on average, the selection of women into these into these programs? As in, like, I'm assuming if we're looking on average, you don't see a difference, but you do see this difference that women who were getting beforehand into like a more selective places, now they're not, and the ones who weren't getting into more selective places, now they're getting into better places. And I think that's really interesting to separate it, because it really shows where the difference lies, which might be obscured by like looking just at the average itself.
So you're referring more to the like this, because this is sort of talking about this a little bit, no? That or
yeah, there was another one that was going down and then up, but also this, yeah.
This one?
Yes, this is the one.
So what is, so can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I'm wondering, so this shows that like, in a sense, the women who are getting into more selective colleges, now they're not, but the women who are getting into less selective ones that had the threshold grade lower than medium, now they're getting, there's more of them who are getting into these. Is it that just like, in a sense, the women who weren't getting into those selective colleges now, like the ones from the green line, are now getting into the less selective ones?
Yes. Yes. So okay. This is all the within field. So as I, this is basically, so nobody's changing enrollment decisions. It's just exactly like the selectivity of the program within the same field. So this is basically saying, you know, econ at the best place versus econ at the second place. There were more females in the first place because females get higher grades. So there was more females in the econ top, and now there's more in the econ second. So this is mostly driven by within field.
Within, okay, I see. Yeah, yeah. So it's the same females who are now basically moving to the colleges that have a threshold grade lower than median.
Exactly, exactly.
Thank you. All right, are there any last questions or thoughts? if not, maybe we can stop here. And thank you so much, everyone, for your questions and interesting discussion. And thank you, Caterina, again for joining us for a really wonderful talk. And yeah, really looking forward to talking more about this.
Very good. Okay, so have a good day, everybody.